evaluating the tools and what they produce is incredibly hard. And, taking the vendor's assertions about how wonderful they are, you have to take with a grain of salt. So, how do we assess quality? Now, unpack that a little bit. Do we have? I mean, if you look at the, sort of AI, machine learning, NLP domain, we've had standard benchmarks for a range of tasks for a long time. You can say, oh, what was your score on squad or this or that? But in the legal space, in the legal tech space, we don't have those things. And so at the highest level, if we did, like, that'd be great, right? Could we have a common benchmark against which we could all score ourselves? That is, that's elusive. And I think that's because at core, evaluating the quality of attorney work product is in and of itself difficult. Evaluating whether or not a given document is good or better than another is inherently subjective. And it is also highly context driven. The same document that is lovely under one set of circumstances might be horrible in another. And how someone assesses those things will vary. So on the one hand, just saying, do we have a true north? No, we don't. As against a generative technology that gets at concepts, not words, and has a variety of ways of expressing similar things at different levels of granularity. So even just assessing the validity of our outputs is hard. So you've got subjective analysis on both ends. So when someone comes up to us and says, oh, we give you this tool and it scores XYZ in our benchmarks, I have no idea what that means. So if I could have a well understood reference point to measure as against, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's probably a couple factors at play. It's both access to the tool itself to kind of really dive into the different types or iterations of models in the application layers. So kind of understanding and having access to the tools is the first thing. And then the second thing is probably just resources and bandwidth on the team's part to really develop and implement large-scale benchmarking efforts internally. Those are the two that come to mind. Iris, yeah, feel free.
I think because you're comparing multiple tools at one time, it's hard for us to replicate that internally. We might be able to do a bake-off with 2 tools at a time and then move on to another 2, but having them all side by side is extremely valuable. And obviously, it's difficult to get attorney time to do that head-to-head comparison all at once.
At Ashurst, when we were doing our own internal evaluations, it was really interesting, kind of from a psychological and sociological perspective, to see, how objectivity and subjectivity worked when you were giving someone a set of scoring criteria and asking them to apply it, but actually you could see those subjective elements root their way in, and certainly depending on someone's background and someone's practice area, they have different views on what good looks like for a certain type of work. And unfortunately, that's just something that exists. And we don't yet know how to deal with that, but it's definitely something that we do need to deal with at some point or at an acceptable level. I think also, the other key thing, of course, and perhaps stating the obvious in terms of being able to do effective evaluation, is having a data set to use for the evaluation. And again, historically, that's been a very human-intensive process. You need someone to come up with the challenges or the tasks or the questions. They also need to produce, an answer or do an actual review and make a decision around whether the output, to score the output, whether it's accurate, whether it's correct, or whatever your criteria criteria is. So being able to do that again with create the data set in the first place, and then, ideally have that be reusable. And that might be fine if you're doing that only for your own organization. But if you're trying to look at something that's more industry wide and can benefit a larger number of people or other groups, then you run into the challenge of, as soon as that data set is available and all of the vendors can then use it for training, it sort of loses its value to a large extent, because now everyone can optimize for that particular data set. So then you need a new data set, and you kind of you go through that ad nauseum. And I think there's probably in the industry still some, or I should say, I don't hear a lot of people talking yet actually around synthetic data for legal. So, I'm not sure what the answer yet is in terms of having a maintainable, high quality data set that reflects real world legal work and legal questions and challenges that can be used to help evaluate on that repeatable, scalable basis.
I think twofold. We need to figure out, one, does it do what the vendor says it's going to do, right? Foundationally. And then two, what it does, is that actually helpful for us? Because, there'll be a lot of times when, I see a product demoed and I'm like, this is great. I would have loved to have this in my practice when I was an attorney. And then we go through and we demo it to, attorneys at our firm. We may even conduct a pilot of it, and they may be like, I don't like it. I don't need this, and that's not how I practice. And so, I think that is one of the challenges that we face, is just figuring out, does this tool actually do what it's supposed to do? And then is it applicable for what we're doing here? And so, kind of tying this back into what we were talking about earlier about, standardization, tying it back into benchmarking. If we have those standards and those benchmarks already at the beginning, we can cut to the chase on a lot of that, at least to say, okay, does it do what it says it's going to do? Because that's huge. And then we can figure out, does that actually work for us? At least we know that it's meeting expectations in that spot. And to kind of tie it back to what you're talking about for pilot fatigue, I think we're in the middle of that here, just because, as I mentioned, we did a ton in 2024. The number of pilots that we launched, the number of attorneys that we had involved, it's tough to keep them interested when every other month you're like, we need your help testing a new tool. And they're like, I've got work to do, I don't necessarily have time to keep testing. So, anything that we can do to minimize the amount of time that we take from our attorneys. And the other thing too, is there's nothing really more embarrassing. Well, there are things more embarrassing, but it's pretty bad when you go to your attorneys and you say, here's a great tool, and the very first time they use it, it doesn't work, right? Or it sucks, it doesn't meet their needs. And you didn't know that because all you saw, was a demo and it worked for your use cases. But it doesn't work for them. And then they come back and say, why are we wasting our time with this? And you're like, well, we have 3 more months with this pilot. So can you try it again, right? So anything we can do to avoid that is huge, because, it's hard when you have such a large firm and so many diverse use cases to make sure that what you're actually looking at is going to be useful for the folks that you're pulling in to test be part of that pilot.
I think if you can have effective mechanisms for doing the mechanical bits of the testing, then actually, and this is a good thing, the conversation moves on to what does good look like, right? And so I think there's a challenge about deciding what does good look like, because at the moment there's a lot of discussion around accuracy or quality, or maybe even speed of response. And it feels like we've gone to those because they're the things that we feel we can measure, rather than they're the things that are necessarily important or the right things. And that, again, we're familiar with that in law all the time, don't we? We measure hours because we can measure hours. But back to the AI stuff, I think, something doesn't need to be 100% accurate to be useful. And so I think having that conversation, understanding what good looks like, and then measuring the things that helps you decide whether or not that is good is the way that we will get to or should get to. But there's quite a lot of hurdles to get over to get to that place, I think, because we might come on to talk about in getting a whole group of lawyers to all agree what good looks like on a particular thing is in of itself a challenge. So yeah, I think getting to that agreement, I think, is kind of both a goal and a hurdle, if that makes sense, Ryan.